In ancient times, the Earth was a very different place. Dinosaurs ruled the planet as they had for millions of years. Yet today, most scientists agree that all that's left are the fossilized remains of these magnificent creatures. But is that true?
Did the impact of a giant asteroid cause a global catastrophe? And did our planet experience nuclear winter as a result? Could it be that a rash of extreme volcanic activity plunged the Earth into a period of darkness and cold that the dinosaurs could not survive?
An asteroid impact or volcanic activity. These are the scientists' favorite theories for explaining the disappearance of the dinosaurs. But is there another possibility? Does the fossil record point to a different kind of natural disaster? Ever since the first dinosaur fossils were found, man has pondered the puzzle of what happened to these great and mysterious creatures. Why and how did they die? Even though millions of years may have passed since they disappeared, the question has implications for our own survival. Were the dinosaurs wiped out by some global catastrophe? If so, could the same thing happen to us? No matter what the cause, most people believe these fantastic creatures were completely wiped out long ago. Perhaps in an effort to avoid the same fate, scientists are continually searching for answers. Are they gone forever? Or might technology allow them to return? Strangely enough, the greatest clue to this earthbound mystery may have come from outer space.
In the 1980s, Luis Alvarez and his son came up with the idea that they'd observed an iridium anomaly due to the impact of a large object from space. A very large object, maybe 6, maybe 10 miles across, weighing hundreds of billions of tons, traveling at very high velocity, 12,000 miles an hour or upwards. And something with that amount of energy plowing into the Earth just causes a huge disaster. And as a result of that, you lose not just all the dinosaurs, but something like half or more of all the species on the planet.
The morning of June 30th, 1908 began like any other day in the Siberian forest. But in the remote region near the Tunguska River, a visitor from outer space was about to change all that. An asteroid exploded in the upper atmosphere with a force of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. The heat from the blast charred tens of thousands of evergreens across hundreds of square miles. For days afterward and for thousands of miles around, the sky remained bright with an eerie orange glow. As far away as Western Europe, people were able to read newspapers at night without a lamp. But because of the blast site's remote location, the cause of this strange phenomenon was not investigated until 20 years later. Only then did scientists realize how close we'd come to disaster. The Tunguska blast of 1908 and the explosion over the Pacific in 1994 provide frightening glimpses into the danger that is lurking in our solar system.
It was lucky for us that the Tunguska event in 1908 occurred over a remote region. If that small asteroid had entered the atmosphere above a densely populated area, for example New York City, then in fact the devastation would have been phenomenal. Almost everybody would have been killed within the city, and the area of damage would have stretched way out into the states of Connecticut and New Jersey.
Some astronomers have even described our planet as being in the middle of a giant cosmic shooting gallery. But are we really sitting ducks? Or are asteroid impacts relatively rare?
The Earth has been hit many times in the past by asteroids and comets. We've got a long history. We can tell that from the craters, but maybe millions of years before the next time we get hit by an asteroid, but it may be tomorrow.
A lot of people think that the Earth's atmosphere can protect us from the threat of impacts, but that's only true for the smallest asteroids. There are plenty of asteroids that are big enough to penetrate the Earth's atmosphere and to strike the Earth, and the larger the asteroid, the more devastating it can be.
For many years, modern scientists dismissed the idea of there being any danger from outer space until they found evidence around the world that changed their minds.
Meteor Crater in northern Arizona is one of the best preserved impact structures on Earth. It was formed by a meteorite that struck about 50,000 years ago. The object that formed the crater was smaller than 100 yards across, but the hole that it made was more than a mile wide and 600 feet deep. That's taller than the Washington Monument. It's so large that 20 football games could be played simultaneously on the crater floor. And at the same time, 2 million spectators could be watching from the crater's sloping sides.
Considering the fact that the largest asteroid known to man is about 630 miles across, the rock that impacted Earth to form Meteor Crater was a mere pebble in comparison. Yet today, an impact like this in a heavily populated area would be devastating. That's why it's even more frightening to think about the kind of damage that could be caused by a large object impact. Is it possible that such a collision could wipe out the entire human race? Imagine an enormous space rock that's on a collision course with Earth. More than 6 miles wide, it weighs over 1 billion tons, and it travels at speeds in excess of 12 miles per second. This nightmare scenario became a reality some 65 million years ago, and our planet would never be the same.
Gravity and magnetic surveys show us that the crater, Chicxulub crater, is approximately 120 miles across. That's about the size of Rhode Island. The impact that formed Chicxulub crater was truly catastrophic. The amount of energy released was the equivalent of 10,000 times the nuclear arsenal of humanity. That's all American and Russian bombs put together. At ground zero, that blew the whole atmosphere away. After the impact, a gigantic fireball wrapped around the globe. Billions of tons of molten and vaporized shattered rock were propelled skyward. At ground zero, the Earth shook so violently that it would have scored a 10 on the Richter scale. That's 1,000 times more energy than the biggest earthquake on record, and it certainly created havoc all around the Gulf of Mexico.
Satellite images of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula reveal what many believe to be a scar in the Earth's crust that was left behind by the impact. Did this set the stage for the death of the dinosaurs?
The impact's blast ring devastated everything within hundreds of miles. Tsunami, tidal waves, moved out from ground zero and hit hard the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, Louisiana, Texas. As dramatic as the impact must have been, the long-term effects were devastating. When the rocks from the blast re-entered the atmosphere, they heated up the air so much that the temperature rose to 700, 800 degrees Fahrenheit. That was enough to start wildfires all across the globe. The water and air were poisoned by acid rain, mostly sulfuric acid from the vaporized rock. Once the fires stopped, then came the big chill as dust and soot blocked out the sun. Inland temperatures plummeted for several years. After all that, the infamous greenhouse effect kicked in to raise the air temperature by about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's enough to wreak havoc over the entire planet.
Where can we go to find evidence that an asteroid impact may have caused the dinosaurs' death? Well, the same place we go to find evidence of their lives: the Earth. A record of the Earth's geological history can be found in the layers of stratified rock and sediment that are found throughout the world. Each layer of rock represents a period of time in Earth's history, and the elements that are found within this geologic column inform us about the conditions that were present on the Earth at the time the sediment was laid down.
This unusual sandstone layer is what we call an event bed. It's part of the KT boundary, which represents the interval of time when the dinosaurs went extinct. In it, we found a lot of shark teeth, shell fragments, fossilized wood, but the most important thing we found is a very high level of a rare metal called iridium. Iridium is found in very low concentrations on the Earth's surface. However, you find much more iridium in meteorites. So when you find a lot of iridium in the KT boundary, that means it was brought in by meteorites, that is, by an impact.
Another point to consider is this. If the Chicxulub crater was not formed by the impact of a 6-mile-wide comet, then how did a layer of iridium spread itself around the globe at the exact same period of time?
Although some scientists like to discount the evidence of the iridium layer found in the geological strata at the KT boundary, in fact, it is found worldwide, and I think that is compelling evidence for the impact theory.
Could something else have wiped out the dinosaurs? Conceivably, but that's like dying of the flu after falling off the Empire State Building. The impact theory is much more plausible. At the time of impact, the volume of rock excavated from the crater would have been huge, 100,000 cubic miles or more. That's like displacing a whole mountain range worth of rock. We can conservatively estimate that about 1% of that rock would have blown clean of the Earth's atmosphere. Most of that rock would re-enter Earth's atmosphere over a period of hours or days. That's enough time for the Earth to rotate underneath it, so it would land on Earth as a ferocious meteor storm all over the globe.
Imagine what it would have been like if humans inhabited the Earth at the time of the Chicxulub impact. Even if you were living half a world away, there would have been no way to escape the deadly fallout or global temperature changes. The vast majority of the world's population, perhaps even the entire human race, would have been wiped off the face of the Earth. The presence of the rare element iridium in the KT boundary certainly seems like convincing evidence for an asteroid impact. But is this really what killed the dinosaurs? Or could there be a more terrestrial explanation, one that continues to threaten the planet, even to this day?
The eruption of the Deccan Traps, one of the most violent periods of volcanism in the history of the Earth, happened about the same time as the Chicxulub impact, which most scientists feel caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. The Deccan Trap eruptions were so violent, they defy imagination. These eruptions covered over 1 million square miles of land in what is now Western India. And it was one lava flow upon another, building up into piles that we would not measure in terms of feet or yards, but in terms of miles.
As devastating as volcanic activity may have been to the ancient Earth, not all scientists agree that it would have been enough to cause the extinction of the dinosaurs. Could some of these creatures have survived the global climatic changes? If so, there must have been another factor that led to their undoing. Something that struck at the very core of future generations. But what?
The impact theory may point us to another possible explanation for the catastrophic eruption of the volcanism theory, that being a non-impact event between our planet Earth and another body in our solar system. Astronomers have long regarded comets as dirty snowballs, collections of ice and stellar debris. That is why they feel that a flyby event of a comet going past the Earth could not trigger a volcanic eruption or an earthquake. Rather, it would take a direct impact. However, in September 2001, our knowledge of comets took a huge leap forward when the Deep Space One probe imaged Comet Borrelli. This comet is over 6 miles in diameter, and what it taught us is that comets are much more dense and much more complex than we had ever thought. If an object the size of Comet Borrelli were to impact the Earth, it would be the end of all life. But if it just simply flew through the atmosphere, the shock wave alone would trigger massive earthquakes and huge volcanic eruptions. It could very well be a repeat of the Deccan Traps.
Could the devastation brought on by volcanic activity and trapped greenhouse gases have snuffed out the lifeblood of the dinosaur population? The case seems convincing, but so does the evidence for the impact theory. Which one is correct? The fact is that scientists have lined up behind both arguments, but are they overlooking some additional evidence? Could there be another explanation for the demise of the dinosaurs? One that's been around for thousands of years? There are some scientists who believe a worldwide flood may have caused the global changes that resulted in the end of the dinosaurs. Could this have been Noah's flood? And is there any evidence to support this theory? If floodwaters covered the Earth, what became of the dinosaurs? Did some of them survive the catastrophe? Might they have survived even to this day? Let's explore some fascinating possibilities. When it comes to the demise of the dinosaurs, the two most widely accepted theories are diametrically opposed. The idea of a catastrophic asteroid impact means that the end came quickly, while the global climatic changes brought on by millions of years of volcanic activity implies a more gradual dying out of the species. Does one of these theories represent the truth? Or is there another possibility? Could it be that a great flood combined with volcanic activity brought about the end of the dinosaurs? There is evidence to suggest that floodwaters played a role in the mass extinction. Could this have been the watery catastrophe spoken of in the book of Genesis? When most people think of the Great Flood, they think of non-stop torrential rain for 40 days and 40 nights. But according to the Bible, there was more to it than that. In Genesis chapter 7, the Bible tells us that on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Can this ancient description be translated into a scientific explanation? Dr. Walter Brown has developed an astonishingly profound theory that touches all points of the argument. Dr. Brown served as director of one of the U.S. Defense Department's major research and development laboratories. His hydroplate theory has become an important and completely new approach to the geological sciences.
We can see on our planet 25 very strange features that can be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This theory explains how mountains were pushed up in hours. It explains the coal and oil deposits, the rapid continental drift, why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and thousands of volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. It even explains the origin of comets, asteroids, and meteorites. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent, with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, but perhaps 9,000 feet high. The Earth also had a lot of salty subterranean water, about half of what is now in our oceans. The water was in interconnected chambers, forming a thin spherical shell about a mile thick, 10 miles below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean waters stretched the crust just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at the rate of 2 miles per second. Following the path of least resistance, it encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure from the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it, so the water exploded violently out of the rupture.
Representations of the flood have always portrayed rain falling from the sky, and certainly that's what the people would have experienced. But that's only part of what the Bible tells us. It also states specifically that on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Could this be the event Dr. Brown's theory describes?
The Bible describes these events, which occurred about 5,000 years ago. We can now tie them together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains also eroded rock on both sides of the crack, even launching many into space.
The Apollo 13 astronauts made an important discovery as they were traveling to the moon. They threw waste matter overboard. Surprisingly, it orbited the spacecraft all the way to the moon. Why?
Here on Earth, you would not feel the spacecraft's gravity, because Earth's gravity is so much larger. But when far from Earth, the spacecraft's gravity dominates things near it. Some rocks launched into space were as big as a city block. Their gravity pulled in smaller rocks, water vapor, and muddy water, which in outer space quickly froze. The gas and gravity caused the orbiting swarms to shrink. If those swarms were primarily ice, they became comets. Comets are simply dirty, fluffy snowballs. If the swarms were primarily rocks, they became asteroids. Asteroids are flying rock piles. And meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites are individual rocks. Most eroded rocks were like sand grains and stayed on Earth. They settled through the waters as sediments, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the rupture's width was so great that the compressed rock beneath the hydroplates sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the chamber floor as it rose about 10 miles to become the mid-Atlantic ridge and the floor of the Atlantic. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles an hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, and buckled. Portions of the hydroplates buckled down, forming ocean trenches. Those that buckled up formed mountains. This is why most mountain ranges are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the rising oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. On the continents, each bowl-shaped depression, or basin, was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes.
This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity supports the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But is there any scientific evidence to support this amazing theory? On March 22, 1998, a group of boys playing basketball in Monahans, Texas, narrowly missed being struck by a 3-pound meteorite that crashed to the ground only 40 feet away. The police were called, and in less than 48 hours, NASA scientists cracked the meteorite open in a clean room laboratory and discovered inside salt crystals and liquid water.
The NASA scientists who investigated this meteorite believe it came from an asteroid. But that's highly unlikely, because asteroids do not have enough gravity to sustain liquid water, and they can't acquire salt. High-pressure liquid water, suddenly expelled into the vacuum of space, will explode with enough energy to place comets and asteroids into large orbits around the Sun. The Sun's energy slowly pushed the rocky bodies, asteroids, away from the Sun and into the asteroid belt, which lies between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. It worked just like a radiometer. Sunlight heats the black side of each vein more than the white side. Rare gas molecules bounce off the hotter side more forcefully than off the colder side. Likewise, the fountains of the great deep placed oceans of water vapor into orbit around the Sun. These gas molecules bounced vigorously off the hot sides of these spinning rocky bodies, the sides facing the Sun. Each day-night cycle produced huge temperature changes because asteroids do not have a thick atmosphere. My computer simulations of this event and the radiometer effect showed that the orbits of asteroids slowly spiraled out to the asteroid belt. Even asteroids with highly inclined orbits were gradually herded in to the asteroid belt. This rocky material has been and is still returning to Earth as meteorites. The Italian Space Agency announced in May of 2001 that they had found, using great care to avoid contamination, 78 different types of living bacteria inside meteorites. Those dormant bacteria could not have originated in outer space. What would they eat? They are simply returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery.
Since 1975, I have predicted that large pools of salt water would be found beneath major mountains. That prediction now appears to be coming true. In April 2001, Science magazine announced the discovery of a highly conductive, mile-thick layer about 10 miles beneath the Tibetan Plateau. To everyone's surprise, they struck hot, salty water
flowing through crushed granite. Geologists are mystified because surface water can't reach those depths. The hydroplate theory gives a simple answer.
But if all of this can explain where the water came from, how does it answer the second question? Where did it go?
This is the question that stops most scientists dead in their tracks. Yet the hydroplate theory makes the answer quite obvious. As the massive continents, moving at about 45 miles per hour, suddenly slid to a halt, they crushed, thickened, buckled, and rose up out of the water. The floodwaters over the continents receded. Simultaneously, the upward surging subterranean water was choked off. With the water source shut off, the deep, newly formed ocean basins between the continents became reservoirs into which the floodwaters drained. Every basin on the continents was left brimful of water. Some of these post-flood lakes were much larger than the Great Lakes. It now appears that one of these large ancient lakes, which I discovered in 1987 and named Grand Lake, breached its natural barrier 20 miles northeast of the Grand Canyon a few centuries after the flood.
The hydroplate theory solves an astonishing number of the Earth's mysteries. In fact, the question of whether or not there was a flood becomes a question of how the world could be what it is today without a global flood. A worldwide flood would explain the disappearance of the dinosaurs, but is there any evidence to prove this theory? The search for answers takes us to an unexpected place, the forefront of scientific research into the origin of man. Groundbreaking work is being done in the field of genetics that seeks to address the age-old question, how old are humans?
The traditional view of scientists is that modern humans simultaneously evolved in different regions of the Earth from an earlier human ancestor, Homo erectus, who in turn was supposed to have migrated out of Africa some 1 million years ago, but the genetic information tells a different story. A recently completed study at Yale University analyzed the genetic information contained in the Y chromosome of modern-day men. The results of the study suggests that Homo sapiens descended from a single group of male ancestors, and that this occurred more recently than scientists had previously believed. According to the chromosomal study, mankind could not have originated more than 270,000 years ago, and even that date may be far too distant. One of the possible explanations that the researchers put forth for their finding is that there was a sudden, significant reduction in the population of Homo sapiens. Although many scientists are reluctant to admit it, this genetic bottleneck could easily be explained by the catastrophe of Noah's flood.
Could it be that the bottleneck discovered in the development of the human species applies to other species as well? Is it possible that men and dinosaurs walked the planet not only at the same time, but literally in the same footprints? Or is it DNA that contains the magic answer to the question of man's beginnings? Is there finally evidence upon which all scientists and theologians can agree? And if scientists have found what could be an ancestor that might be the biblical Adam, what about a biblical Eve? When it comes to the age of the human race, there are two diametrically opposed theories. The most commonly accepted is that of the evolutionists, who believe that modern man evolved between 225,000 and 2 million years ago. On the other side of the fence are the creationists, who believe that God created the heavens, the earth, and man somewhere in the time frame of 6,000 to 50,000 years ago. Christians also believe that all humans are descendants of Adam and Eve. Which one of these viewpoints has the latest DNA evidence on its side? You'd be surprised.
The nucleus of a human cell contains 99.5% of our DNA, that is, the tiny strands of coded information that codes for the structure and function of the human body. Half of that DNA comes from an individual's mother and the other half from the father, but because both halves are shuffled together, it's difficult to identify which parent contributed which element. Mitochondrial DNA is different. It's found outside the nucleus of the cell, where there are hundreds of little energy-producing components called mitochondria. Each of these mitochondria contains a circular strand of DNA that's contributed exclusively by the mother. Because mitochondrial DNA remains relatively unchanged, it can be used to trace a person's lineage back for thousands of years, and perhaps even to the beginning of time. The uproar about mitochondrial DNA really began back in 1987 when a study was conducted by researchers at UC Berkeley which compared the mitochondrial DNA of 147 people from 5 of the world's geographic locations. Based on the results of the study, researchers concluded that all of the 147 people had the same female ancestor, an individual that's become known as the mitochondrial Eve. Evolutionists theorized that the original group of humans contained more than one woman, so it had several sources for mitochondrial DNA. However, the DNA for all but one of the sources became extinct when subsequent generations failed to produce any female offspring. Therefore, the mitochondrial Eve is simply the one and only female of the original population whose offspring have provided a continuous supply of female descendants. The mitochondrial Eve evidence does not force the belief that there was only one woman from whom we all descended, but, and this is very important, it is most definitely consistent with it. And of course, this is something that evolutionists never expected they'd have to deal with. So in order to explain away the possibility of the biblical Eve, they've had to come up with a very far-fetched explanation about mitochondrial Eve. Their explanation is that her family somehow spread across the globe and replaced all the other archaic humans, who just happened to have failed in their efforts to produce human female offspring. Now that's pretty hard to swallow.
The news that mitochondrial DNA might prove the existence, or at least the possibility, of the biblical Eve sent shockwaves through the scientific community. How could all humans be descended from one individual if our species was supposedly evolving all over the world? But there was another fact to deal with. Mitochondrial DNA evidence was about to reveal the time frame in which this common ancestor lived. Would this piece of information support the prevailing scientific wisdom, or deal it another blow?
Evolutionists were very aware of the way in which the mitochondrial Eve discovery could have been seen to have vindicated the Bible, so they countered this supposition with proof that the mitochondrial Eve lived far too long ago to be the biblical Eve. This belief was based on something called a molecular clock. The molecular clock theory proposes that mutations in the mitochondrial DNA of humans occur at a certain rate, and when we compare the genetic material of various groups of people who are alive today, we find certain differences in the genetic code that result from those mutations. By rewinding the genetic clock, scientists came up with an estimated rate of mutation and thus were able to calculate the supposed age of mitochondrial Eve. The first surprise that evolutionists got from the molecular clock was that Eve existed approximately 250,000 years ago. Evolutionists have been saying for years that our common ancestor was an ape-like creature who lived some 3.5 million years ago. And in their view, it required millions of years for our supposed evolutionary ancestors to evolve into humans. But there's this molecular clock which they devised, telling them that this all happened in a time frame of just 250,000 years. In effect, the molecular clock threw the evolutionary clock out the window.
Faced with what seemed to be an impossible date for the origin of mankind, researchers went back to the lab to determine if any mistakes had been made. Perhaps a miscalculation had thrown off their molecular clock. But would a recalibration lead them to dates that would support the theory of evolution, or would it push them even closer to the biblical time frame?
Scientists who felt that the molecular clock dates for mitochondrial Eve were out of line were in for an even bigger surprise in 1998. New discoveries were made which indicate that mutations in mitochondrial DNA occur even more rapidly than previously thought. In fact, the latest DNA research shows that mutations occur 20 times faster than the original estimate. That means that the mitochondrial Eve lived between 6,000 and 6,500 years ago.
This shocking DNA evidence would seem to cast doubt on Darwin's theory of evolution. But what if there were more solid proof? So solid, in fact, that it's set in stone.
In 1908, there was a bad flood in the Paluxy River, which runs through the middle of Texas. It ripped off the layer of limestone off the bottom of the riverbed, exposing hundreds of dinosaur footprints and human footprints in the same layer of limestone. Sometimes the tracks are overlapping each other. This is one of many indicators that man and dinosaurs lived together.
Are these tracks actually fossilized human footprints? Are they dinosaur tracks that have eroded in such a way that they look like human prints? Or are they simply a hoax?
By 1930, in the Depression, some people began selling some of these footprints, actually chiseling them out to sell. When they learned they could make some money, some people made a few fake footprints. About 7 phony footprints were made that we're aware of. And some have used that to say, well, they're all fake. There have been many expeditions where they've dug into the bank of the river, exposing new footprints with cameras rolling, following a trail back into the bank that nobody could have possibly carved because they're under hundreds of pounds of rock and mud. So these are definitely legitimate.
How could humans have left footprints in the same mud as dinosaurs? According to the timetable of evolution, this would be impossible. But there's more. Carbonized plant remains that were found in the same strata as the fossilized footprints have been dated to just 39,000 years ago. But the strata in which these fossils were found was thought to be 100 million years old. In other words, old enough for dinosaurs to have made their tracks, but way too old for humans. How old are humans? The answer to that question remains elusive. But what is the evidence trying to tell us? Does the history of man need to be rewritten? Did man and dinosaurs exist at the same time? Or are the Paluxy River tracks just a fluke of nature? It would be convenient to dismiss them as such, but there is one last piece of evidence to consider. Dinosaur skeletons weren't discovered or assembled until the mid-1800s, and yet ancient people, such as the Incas of Peru, left behind painted and etched stones that depict dinosaurs and men together. How could this be possible?
The Bible teaches very clearly in Exodus 20:11 in the Ten Commandments that God made everything in 6 days, which means man had to live with dinosaurs. They didn't call them dinosaurs in those days, they called them dragons. They're mentioned in the Bible. In Job chapter 40 and in chapter 41 it describes 2 dinosaurs. Job 40 describes Behemoth, which has a tail like a cedar tree. This is probably the Brachiosaurus, so the biggest animal ever made. If you read the description in Job 40 with that in mind, it makes perfect sense that this is talking about a dinosaur. Many ancient cultures record evidence of man and dinosaurs living together with pictures on pottery or pictures on walls of caves or artwork. Certainly many legends exist about man and dinosaurs or dragons living together. I think the evidence is overwhelming that dinosaurs did not live before man got here.
It appears that we have much evidence in the world today that dinosaurs have lived into modern times. For example, I've done a lot of research with Indian people, and in their pictographs and petroglyphs, they have drawn pictures of dinosaurs. For example, in the Grand Canyon, one of a huge sauropod or apatosaurus-like creature, also one of a possible T-Rex. We also see in the Inca stones down in Peru, huge stones that were buried with the kings over 1,000 years ago, pictographs carved into the rock showing humans and dinosaurs interacting.
Is it possible that humans and dinosaurs walked the Earth together? Most scientists would laugh at the idea. After all, the geologic column tells us that the age of the dinosaurs ended 65 million years ago, while even the most liberal estimates of man's reign begin just 2 million years ago. Can the two be reconciled? Or is it possible the geologic column is wrong?
The fallacies of the geological column can be seen in what are called polystrate fossils. Animals like whales have been found whose bodies are buried in dozens of layers of the geologic column. Either these animals lived for millions of years, or they were buried rapidly and catastrophically. The prevailing wisdom is that because the sedimentary rock containing fossils is so stratified, each layer must represent eons of time. So, if the fossil of a particular whale species is found in several different strata, then that species must have survived for millions of years. But there is another, and I think better, explanation. The process of liquefaction could easily account for many sedimentary layers being laid down one on top of the other within a short period of time. During the flood, that's exactly what happened. Wave action reduced the ocean floor to a liquid consistency as the waters churned above it. Then, as the waters began to settle, plants and animals were trapped in the sediment. These layers eventually solidified and became the fossil record.
This startling discovery indicates that some marine reptiles may have escaped the Genesis flood. In 1977, the nets of a Japanese fishing ship caught the decaying body of what was believed to be a long-extinct amphibious dinosaur. And there have been other surprising discoveries.
In 1983, Russians found dinosaur and human footprints in the same rock strata, similar to the ones found in Glen Rose, Texas. Evidence of man and dinosaurs living together has come from other countries as well. Several places in the United States and in Australia indicate they live together. Occasionally the footprints are overlapping each other, frequently side by side, indicating they had to be there within a few hours of each other, or the rock would have hardened and this would not have been possible.
Here at Glen Rose, Texas, in the Cretaceous limestone layers, we've excavated a nearly complete Acrocanthosaurus dinosaur, along with 203 dinosaur footprints, 7 cat prints, 57 identifiable human footprints, a confirmed human finger in the same Cretaceous limestone layering, and in adjacent area was discovered completely encased in Cretaceous sandstone an ancient hammer. These excavated evidences confirm that the Genesis account of the flood is viable, that the record of man and dinosaur living contemporaneously, as given in the book of Job, is correct.
Does the great flood of the Bible account for the disappearance of the dinosaurs and the formation of the fossil record? It is an alternative explanation. But according to the best estimates of Bible scholars, Noah's flood occurred a mere 5,000 years ago. Are we to believe that some species of dinosaurs were alive up until this time? And if so, what happened to these animals when the floodwaters receded?
Most of the food chain was buried in the Great Flood. Then, as the floodwaters receded, the planet inevitably underwent some major climatic changes, which negatively affected the food chain. So, if any dinosaurs survived the flood, they probably had difficulty feeding themselves and, as a result, became extinct.
Did Noah's flood kill the dinosaurs? The answer remains elusive. But whatever calamity overtook these creatures, most people believe they were wiped out completely long ago. But is this true? Or could it be that some have survived?
There's strong evidence that dinosaurs still live in the world today. In the jungles of the Congo, in Africa, the native people talk about a creature they call Makili Mombembe. Scientists, using pictures and the descriptions the people have given them, have classified this as a sauropod or an apatosaurus. Myself, I have led expeditions to Canada looking for one that the native people call Ogopogo or Manapogo in Lake Manitoba. And we have interviewed Native American people there who have given descriptions as well as eyewitness accounts of this creature. We think that one may be a plesiosaurus or a basilosaurus.
If you're willing to include pterodactyls and plesiosaurs in the dinosaur category, then there are dinosaurs, pterodactyls and plesiosaurs being seen in numerous countries. They've been seen in Kenya, Africa, and Indonesia. Reports of these critters come from many places. I've had many people that I've interviewed that claim they've seen one of these animals. The pterodactyls have about a 4-foot wingspan. The plesiosaurs seem to be 15 or 20 feet long, so not as big as they used to be.
Are dinosaurs alive today? Well, that seems a little too far-fetched to be true. But the fact is, relics from the age of the dinosaurs have been found alive in modern times. A species of prehistoric fish called the coelacanth was thought to have been extinct for millions of years until a living specimen was caught off the coast of Africa in the early 20th century. Luckily, an observant museum curator was on the docks that day to inspect the fisherman's catch and verify the find. The fisherman told the curator that they'd caught this kind of fish before, but they had no idea that it was anything special. Is the case of the coelacanth a rare exception, or are there more living dinosaurs just waiting to be found? The possibilities are mind-boggling. But even if the coelacanth represents the last of the dinosaurs, does this mean the creatures are gone forever? Could the successful cloning of animals like Dolly the sheep be replicated with dinosaurs? And do we possess the needed DNA?
As unbelievable as it may sound, dinosaur bones have recently been found that are not fully fossilized. According to the accepted geological time frame, these bones should be at least 65 million years old. And yet, when they were examined under a microscope, they were found to contain non-fossilized bone, protein, blood cells, and even the blood protein hemoglobin.
How is it possible that dinosaur bones failed to fossilize after millions of years? Could it be that the discovery of non-fossilized bones supports a more biblical time frame for the destruction of the dinosaurs? And what about the blood and bone that have survived? Could these provide scientists with enough DNA material to clone a dinosaur?
Extracting DNA is a notoriously difficult process, even under ideal conditions. In the case of non-fossilized dinosaur bones, any DNA we might be able to recover would be severely degraded. But let's say the DNA extraction process was a success. There would still be major problems to overcome. The extremely long list of molecular instructions in DNA has to be assembled in the correct order. If pieces of the genetic code were missing, it might be possible to use a closely related species to help reconstruct it. For example, an elephant genome might be used to construct a mammoth genome. When it comes to dinosaurs, some scientists believe that birds are their closest living relatives, but you can't create the genome for a T-Rex from a bird. So at this point, I'd say that cloning dinosaurs is out of the question. But as the saying goes, never say never.
Will we someday have the technology to clone dinosaurs? Or are these magnificent creatures destined to remain a part of history? Either way, the question of what killed the dinosaurs continues to intrigue scientists and enthusiasts alike, perhaps because it's a mystery that needs to be solved, especially if the human race is to avoid the same fate.